Okay, thank you for inviting me. I think for me, this is very exciting. As some of you know, together with my co-editors, I set up the journal Glossa in 2016 after we left Elsevier. We flipped the journal the journal Lingua at Elsevier to Glossa in 2015 and 16. Basically, flipping means that you take the entire community of an existing journal at a commercial publisher and you move that community to a new journal, a diamond journal, which is, I think, the most effective way of creating diamond journals, which is useful for a number of reasons that I will explain to you. I have made a presentation. It's about 11 slides. It's not very long. It's really to try to give you the basics of what a diamond journal is, because I mean, I think a lot of people are sort of afraid of, to start their own journal. And what I want to show you, in fact, is that there's nothing to be afraid of. Publishing is much less complicated than the commercial publishers try to make it out to be. It's actually, as I said this morning to someone, it's not much more complicated than a mid-level Lego piece that you buy for your children at Christmas. You just have to know what you're doing. It's really not complicated. It's not rocket science. So let me share my screen with you. And so this is really is how to set up a diamond open access journal. And so the image I give there is of a diamond in the rough with the rough diamond with the diamond shape inside it, because that's what we're trying to make, right? We are trying to make a diamond open access journal. First, something about the diamond open access model of publication. There's two things that characterize the diamond model, I think. This is actually coming together more and more also in the projects that we are doing now. One aspect is no fees for readers or authors, because we think that's the most equitable mechanism to ensure the scholarly conversation. If you have APCs, that is all nice and well for researchers from the north, but of course, if you live in Oslo, in Berlin, or in New York, that's not a problem. It's maybe not a problem to pay 2,000 or 3,000 euros for a paper, but if you're from New Delhi or Sao Paulo or Nairobi, it's a very different proposition. So what we want in Diamond Open Access is no fees for readers or authors. That doesn't mean that there are no costs. I mean, of course there are costs, but these costs must be borne by the entire scientific community, by ministries, by funders, by universities, also by the in-kind labor of scientists if they want to do so. That's my case, for instance. I do my work in the journal for now is completely voluntary and self-inflicted, if you like. The second aspect of Diamond Open Access that actually is also for me at the same level as the first aspect is that it is owned and run by the scholarly community. So it's decidedly non-commercial. Non-commercial does not mean that there's none of the aspects is commercial. Of course, things like typesetting and copy editing and certain services can be farmed out, but the control of content-related elements is in the hands of the scholarly community. That means that we as scholars keep the rights to the papers, keep the rights to the reviews, to the journal title, and to the decision. We call the shots, and we determine what kind of contracts that we conclude with commercial publishers. Publishers that then are much more service providers rather than now the one who dictate the terms to us about what academic publishing should be like. This is a model that is coming up, that is actually developing very, very quickly now, because funders and also universities have realized that the costs for gold open access are rising tremendously. I mean, in France, for instance, they have realized that if they continue on this route, in 10 years, they will pay 3 times as much for APCs as they are doing now. So there's increasingly also becoming an economic argument for Diamond Open Access. And so that is being organized now at the European level with various projects, the Diamas project and a couple of other projects that I'm involved in. Also at the global level, where in last October in Toluca, Mexico, we decided to set up a global federation for Diamond Open Access, because science, of course, is a global endeavor. And if we want an infrastructure for Diamond Open Access, it has to be a global infrastructure, distributed infrastructure. which will be under the auspices of UNESCO, which lends it a certain amount of gravitas, of course. I wrote some things about the principles of Diamond Open Access. You will get these slides afterwards, so you can look it up. This is something that I wrote myself on the principles of Diamond Open Access, which you can look at in. So this is more about the theory and the principles of open access, more the theoretical side. But today I'm here to talk to you not about the principles of open access, of which you are hopefully all convinced, but about what you need, how you can build your journal. And a number of things that I say will be obvious for some of you, but I'm going to say them anyway. The foundation really is not it's not very complicated. First of all, you need to ask yourself, do you have a supportive community? Do you have a tightly knit community for the topic of interest for your journal that recognize itself as a community and interacts accordingly as a group? That is the first question you have to ask yourself. I mean, if that's the case, of course, because you are in the field that you say, well, duh, of course we are. But sometimes that's not the case. Sometimes people sort of, you know how it is. Subdisciplines coalesce, they die, they transform into something else. So this is the first question you have to ask. What is the group? And when I say group, it's not a group of 30 people. Huh? I mean, you need, you're not going to make a journal for 30 people where the 30 people will publish and that's it. It's just a little in-group. We are talking about a group of several hundred people who are interested in this and who seek a venue for publication. Because a journal is first and foremost that for me. It's a community. And this is something that I really felt very strongly in 2015 when I flipped the journal that belonged to a publisher to an open access community and an open access journal. Is you feel that it's the community that supports you and it's the community that legitimizes you, nothing else. So what you also need, the second thing you absolutely need is a dedicated team, preferably experienced editors. They are really worth their weight in gold. You only need one or two experienced editors, but an experienced editor is really very, very valuable. I mean, if you have to learn everything from scratch, that may be a bit challenging. And then, of course, I mean, there are trainings, there are things that you can do to become an editor, but it is always good to have a mix of experienced and less experienced editors. You can find them, of course, among people who have done academic publishing for commercial publishers. You can also try to flip a journal, an existing journal, with their editors away. So this is something that you can do. You can convince existing journals in your community to flip to Diamond Open Access simply because it's the right and ethical thing to do. And then the last thing you need is funding, because as I said, Diamond Open Access doesn't mean it's for free. There is money, some money is needed, but usually it's much less money than people think it is. What you need is not so much a chunk of money at the beginning, because that is sometimes what happens. People get, the library will give you 10,000 euros and then they think they have given you the world and that's it. For the rest of your days. But what you really need is sustainable funding. It doesn't need to be much, but it needs to be annual. It needs to be a regular income from an institution, a library, a scholarly society. It doesn't matter for your aunt, your grandmother, it doesn't matter where it comes from, but it has to be regular. And the amount of money you need, of course, is also really depends on how much you are able or willing to do yourself. But in my view, I mean, any journal that, I mean, if the journal, let's say, publishes 15 to 20 articles a year, then you can do most things yourself. But usually, a reasonable sized journal is 50 to 100 journals or 100 to 150 journals. And in some fields, much, much more, of course. Sometimes some fields draw hundreds or even thousands of articles a year. So it really depends on the size, on what the scale is that you are thinking of. But a typical journal, for instance, my journal, Glossa, publishes about 120 journals a year. We have about 350 submissions a year. We handle that with a team of about 10 people, 10 associate editors. So that's a reasonable size that you can do with hosting it on Janeway systems, which is about 1,200 a year. It doesn't cost me that because we are part of the Open Library of Humanities, but this is a reasonable cost. I mean, and Janeway really allows you to do a lot of things. It's both a platform and a submission system, and it really works wonderfully well. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I've been in publishing for 25 years. I've published a journal for 25 years, and this is really a very good system. And then, of course, there's also copy editing and typesetting. What you do not want to do yourself as an editor, because is something like a copy editing and typesetting. That's something that you want to farm out to a professional. And we are using a typesetter and a copy editor, light copy editing in India, a company that doesn't exploit its employees, and they ask for about 240 pounds per paper. So again, it really depends what you want to do, how big the journal is that you want to set up. But in the large scheme of things, when you're thinking about APCs of 3,000 per paper, this is not a lot of money, right? I mean, I think everybody can agree that this is not a lot of money to set up your Diamond journal, and this is what it costs me and the journals that I'm involved with. All right. I mean, this is not much more. If this sounds incredibly cheap, and if you can't believe me, I mean, I can show you the books. I mean, I have no problem doing that. But you do need sustainable funding. And with sustainable funding, I mean, year on year for 5 to 10 years, you have to have that guarantee that that money will be there for you, right? So this is also something that you can do by levying a voluntary author contribution. If your field has lots of funding, for instance, if your field has lots of funding from funders, if people draw in lots of projects, for instance, that are paid, then they can contribute a voluntary author contribution from that. For instance, one of the journals that we are running, Glossa Psycholinguistics, the subtitle of Glossa, is a journal that is edited, that is published in California, and it's largely run on voluntary author contribution, because psycholinguistics is a field where the authors commonly have access to lots of funded projects. And so one author out of two can contribute a voluntary author contribution of about $500. And with that $500, we pay for 2 articles, basically for the cost of 2 articles. And that's a way of sustaining the journal by itself. So there's various, you have to think of various creative ways of making the journal sustainable. But that is also one of the first things that you will see when you do run a Diamond journal is you are responsible for everything. So you and your team are responsible for everything. And that is something that you need to take into account as well when starting such a journal. But does it cost a lot of money? I don't think it costs a lot of money compared to what the commercial publishers are asking. And I guarantee you can put out a result, an end paper that looks just as good as those of the commercial publishers. If you don't believe me, look at our papers on Glossa. They're out there for everyone to see. We have XMLs, we have PDFs that are nicely done, nicely typeset in a domain, linguistics, which is quite demanding when it comes to, representations, tables, figures, diacritics, and those kinds of things. So what I would like to insist on is a journal is really a community, and it's that community that will help you, that can also help you finance. It's a community of authors, readers, editors, reviewers, and editorial board members. And this is not, you don't have to take my word for it. This is what researchers on academic publishing have said themselves. Value of a journal is the community it creates, not the papers it publishes. And I think that's very right. That is has actually also been my experience, especially when I moved away from a commercial publisher. You realize how much the community needs this, and you realize how much the community will support you when you move in that direction. So this is something really, really very valuable, and you have to sort of make use of that support that is out there. Something I've been maybe too fast. Yeah, no. Then something about how to set up the journal. The first thing that you need to think of when you set up a journal is to think carefully about the aims and scope of the journal. What are the aims and scope? It should be relatively narrowly defined, because it should allow authors to see whether they should submit their paper there. And it should also allow editors to tell authors why their paper is not welcome there. I mean, it's really a community, right? It's like It's basically, you have to see this as a tennis club. If you don't play tennis, don't go to the tennis club. There's nothing you can do there, right? I mean, if you go to the tennis club to play football, there's no point. So you have to make it quite clear from the outset in the aims and scope what the goal of your journal is and what the community is that it intends to serve, what the topic is. Because it allows the editors to say, look, this is really not for us, and for this reason, you give a very objective reason why this is not, why the paper that is submitted is not right for you. And also, it allows the community to recognize itself in that description. Typically, aims and scope take days to write. I mean, I've done this for sister journals, for instance. It really takes very careful formulation. Choose a simple title, apply for an ISSN. That is something that is, again, easy to do. The basic rules, of course, is the publication model you need to choose, namely Diamond, yes, but do you want to do pre-publication peer review or post-publication peer review? Those are the two models that are out there now. Post-publication peer review is less well known, but it is a model that we are also trying to push as Coalition S. It is the so-called publish, review, curate model, where basically preprints are published first, then reviewers are sought for those preprints, and then finally there is a curation aspect when the paper is published. And all of this process is open. There is an open peer review process in that case. It's still a minority model. The most publication models are still simply post-publication peer review, so where the peer review is sort of taking place in a safe context, in a safe hidden context for the rest of the world, and then the paper is published. So there is no obligation to take one or the other. You can simply do a more traditional journal. Glossa, for instance, is such a traditional journal. We receive submissions, we send them out to reviewers, and that process is a private process where the reviewers look at the paper, examine it, give their reviews, and then we make a decision on the basis of those reviews and inform the author of the revisions they need to undertake for the paper to be publishable. The license type in Diamond is always CC BY or a variant thereof of CC BY. CC BY means that the author keeps their rights on the paper, but also licenses the article to be reused by other people as long as proper credit is given. CC BY is the license that is closest to common academic practice. So this is something that is important. And then what you also need to do on that aims and scope page is give the author guidelines. So first of all, what are the types of publication that you want to put out? Of course, research papers, but also, are you considering book reviews or not? Are you prepared to do registered reports or not? You know, the article types. Are you prepared to do to publish short articles? To publish things like protocols or data papers? There's various types of papers that you may want to consider to publish or not. So again, this is something that you need to specify. What is the type of paper and the description of the type of paper that you expect? And then, of course, the typical things like submission information and style sheet, which you can always rob from somewhere else, from an existing style sheet somewhere, depending on what is customary in your field. So those are not complicated things. But you need to think carefully about what is the aims and scope, what are the types of content that we want to publish. Because, I mean, every type of content that you publish will cost you money. I mean, every item that you publish has a certain cost attached to it. So it's one of the reasons, for instance, we no longer really do book reviews, because, I mean, a book review is rarely read and it's expensive to publish. So this is something you might want to consider going forward, even if it's very useful sometimes. But still, I mean, you know, you need to carefully consider what you want to publish. So that's for the aims and scope. A third thing that is important once you set it up, the journal is that you need to give a lot of information to your community and to every member of that community. First of all, you have to inform your authors what they can expect. So you have to give them an indication of what you will do as the editor with the paper. You would sort of give an outline of you know, what of the peer review process, say what you will do, what they can expect, when they can expect the decision, more or less. And then explain to them also how decisions are made, why you take the decisions that you do. Make it transparent. Create confidence in your brand. Also give guidelines to your reviewers. And that is often not done. People often sort of expect that reviewers know what they have to do. But as we all know, if I asked you for a show of hands, who learned how to write a review in graduate school, probably there would be very few hands going up, right? I mean, people are sort of expecting you to know how to write your review without you ever having learned it. So it's always good to have reviewer guidelines. Again, these are things that you can find on websites. You can always copy it from the Glossa website or from other websites and then adapt it to your own needs. You also need to have policies, various sets of policies. One of the most important one is a data policy, namely a data policy statement that says that all the data on which the article is based are also openly available. This is, of course, in the interest of open science and open access. If you all have an open access journal, it doesn't make much sense to make the data that are behind the paper that you provide in open access to make those data closed. So we made it the principle that all the data have to be open at the time of publication so that readers can redo the job and look at the data and see whether the conclusions that are drawn in the article are indeed coming out of the data that have been provided. This is maybe a somewhat radical policy, but it is a very successful one, and it is one that we didn't have until 5 years ago. But today it has really become the norm in many journals, and I think it is a standard that Diamond Open Access journals should hold themselves to. There's, of course, other policies. Again, these are very often policies that you can copy and paste from other websites of your favorite journals. Ethics policies, authorship guidelines, preprint policy, do you accept preprints or not? The expected behavior, how you expect people to behave when interacting as a reviewer, as an author on the site, what your policy is for corrections and retraction, and what your policy is for equity, diversity, and inclusion. So those are things that you can find. And then there are also publisher level policies, because most often you will work with a publisher, the Diamond Open Access publisher of some sort. So then you have to also look at things like policies for research integrity, plagiarism, archiving and indexing, and what the publisher responsibilities are. And so you have to weigh those against your own policies as a journal. So there's this difference between publisher level policies and journal level policies. If you don't have a publisher, of course, you will have to look into those as well. But again, these are not hard to find. These are things that you can easily set up. But it is sort of part of the checklist that you need of needs to have for a paper. This is what you really need to have when you do a journal. Then there are technical aspects, and technical aspect is probably the thing that is most daunting for people who have never done publishing. But actually, like I said, it's really like a Lego. It's not that complicated. Many of the technical services that we use as editors and publishers are external and independent of the journal. So things, for instance, like journal and article level metrics, or indexing, or DOIs, search engine optimization, and long-term archiving are services that are made accessible by the submission system and platform that you use. For instance, when I use Janeway and I publish an article, I assign a DOI to that article through the Janeway platform, which is connected to Crossref, and Crossref then gives the DOI to that article, and that article receives that DOI. Many of these services are completely out of our grasp or out of our influence, and there were some questions before that you sent to Cost before I gave this before the presentation, and you asked, what do we do about journal metrics? Well, there's actually, as a journal, there's not so much you can do about journal and article journal metrics. Journal metrics is something that is decided independently by certain commercial entities like Web of Science or Google Scholar, and this is something that comes as the journal grows. Usually, Web of Science takes 5 years, so you have to have that trek through the desert of 5 years where your journal sort of builds reputation, and then after 5 years, Clarivate will index it and give you the hated impact factor, the hated or desired impact factor, which is less and less important. As you know, perhaps Coalition S is no longer taking impact factor into account. Slowly, people are coming to the realization that the impact factor is a scam. But these are things that we are still living with. So these are things that we have to take into account. But again, this is not something you can influence yourself. The only thing you can do for the first 5 years is do as good a job as you can by attracting the best papers in your field, by making sure that they are properly reviewed, that they are properly visible and citable. Article level metrics, again, is something that is available through the submission system and platform usually. So there's a lot of technical things here that are done automatically. Then another thing is that you also, as a journal, you will need to build a profile on social media. So this is something you can do via listservs and conferences and mailings. But I found when I set up the journal in 2015-16 is that social media really help. An Instagram profile or a Facebook profile really help to rally the community and to make sure that you are visible within the community. Twitter or X, I mean, even though, our Mastodon will also help. You need to find a place where you can bring these people together so that they know also when articles are being published and that you are visible for the rest of the community. So this is, I see this also as a kind of a technical aspect of running the journal. Again, this is not something that the editor has to do by themselves. These are tasks that you can farm out to various people who are responsible for the journal, but it is an important aspect in the visibility, in creating visibility for the journal inside its own community. These more technical services are more services to make it also visible for the rest of the world and for other communities beyond the inside community. And then I'm coming to an important part, a part that I think is really important for setting up a journal, is the governance. How do you govern a journal? First of all, there's ownership. As a Diamond Open Access journal, it is very important that you own the title, that you make sure that you own the title, and that you make sure that it cannot be sold to a commercial publisher or that a commercial publisher cannot capture it. So you need to set up a foundation or find a scholarly society or not-for-profit organization that can legally own the title. Because as I found out to my own expense is, as a group, a community in and by itself cannot own stuff. For legal ownership, you need a legal entity, and not-for-profit organizations are legal entities. Only legal entities can own stuff. Don't ask me why, but that's what I found out. So the title needs to be owned, and the title needs to be owned in a specific way that I will explain in a minute. If you don't want to be able to, if you want it not to be able to be sold. Then there is the governance structure of the journal itself that you need to think about. Namely, you will need an editorial team, you will need a board, you will need to think about the composition of those, the respective responsibilities, the selection procedures. So how are people elected to be editor, and what are the terms of office? For instance, because one of the things you want to be able to do, of course, if an executive editor or an associate editor is not performing their duties well, you want to be able to terminate their employment. Basically, these are club rules. Basically, what you're setting up is club rules, right? I mean, you reward good behavior and you have measures to exclude people who are not behaving well if a problem arises. I mean, these things are only needed, of course, when problems arise, but you have to be able to say, look, you have a term for 3 years, the term is renewable for 3 years or for 5 years, right? Because I think it's important to have continuity of the journal's governance. So this is something that you can build in. Again, this is something that we've done at Glossa as well, but thinking of governance is very important. There's various models, of course, of running a journal. very often in some domains of social sciences and humanities, there's a communal model of running a journal. So basically, it's the if it's a small journal publishing, 15 or 20 articles a year, what they will do is come together once a week, look at the papers that have come in, and decide to send these ones out, and these ones will be just desk rejected as a group. That is something that happens in smaller journals. For bigger journals, that is almost impossible because you get 10 to 20 submissions a week. So basically what happens there, that's the model that we use at Glossa, is you have one or two co-editors in chief who look at everything that comes in, who either desk reject it immediately on the basis of the aim and scope, or farm it out to a set of associate editors who are more specialized. For instance, I get a paper in this morning on Chinese syntax. Well, I have one of my co-editors is a specialist of Chinese, and she gets all the papers on Chinese, no questions asked. Those are assigned to her, and then she handles that paper independently. She can decide to desk reject it because she thinks it's still not good enough after my first pass, or she can decide to send it out to reviewers, and then she makes a decision independently. If she is in doubt, she can always consult with the other associate editors, but in principle, she is her own master and she handles the articles assigned to her. And I, as an editor-in-chief, have only, let's say, a general view of what is being done. So that is a very nice and scalable way of organizing the journal, because if your journal goes from 20 papers to 50 papers to 500 papers, you can scale accordingly. You can scale by simply adding associate editors to the journal and making sure that they are not overloaded. You should not have more than 10 to 15 papers per associate editor as a rule, because otherwise people get overloaded. 15, 20. I have more, of course, but that's normal. I've been doing this for a long time. But you need to sort of make it manageable for people, because they do this out of their free time, right? Or out of their research time. You want to keep it manageable for everyone to handle the papers that are assigned to them. So that's basically how the structure works. You need to have a governance structure. You need to write up those rules, and then you need to think about the model that you are adopting for this. Let me give you the case of my own journal. So in my case, for instance, we have set up a foundation called Lingoa, Linguistics in Open Access. That's a not-for-profit foundation under Dutch law. Again, this is not hard to set up. In the Netherlands, you go to a notary, you pay 900 euros, and you have your foundation. It's that simple. It's really not complicated. And then you have this legal entity that can own stuff. You need to have a board, of course, but they have the legal owner of the title Glossa as a not-for-profit foundation. Now, of course, as a not-for-profit foundation, Lingoa has then granted the General Assembly of the journal beneficial ownership of the more specific title Glossa, a journal of general linguistics. Why did we do that? Because this division between legal ownership and beneficial ownership is what makes it almost impossible to sell the journal. It's like a house. If you've ever had, it's like when one of your parents dies and you own the house, sometimes in terms of beneficial ownership or legal ownership. And this is called the divided ownership. This is what we created for the journal to make it impossible to sell. Because if the General Assembly, the editorial team and board, which consists of about 40 people, has to agree to a person to sell the title, I mean, that's going to be very hard, because there's always going to be someone who's going to object, right? You have to have complete agreement, both on the side of the foundation and on the people who have beneficial ownership, that you can sell the title. And I do not think that is likely to happen. So this is one way that we have found. It's kind of a loophole, if you want, in ownership, in order to make it impossible to sell the journal to commercial entities. The reason I say this is important, because a journal is worth money. I have been offered up to $500,000 for the journal Glossa to sell it, and I wanted to make that impossible, because you never know. I mean, after me, there may be an editor who gambles at the casino and who has debts and who decides, oh, maybe I should sell the journal, right? a journal is worth money. I mean, if you think of that journal with 100, 120 articles a year, and you multiply that amount of articles by an APC of 3,000, you have an annual income of, several €100,000. So that is worth something for a publisher, right? I mean, and it's basically gold, right? I mean, the actual production cost of an article are maybe €500 tops, and you ask for an APC of 3,000, so the rest 2,500 is pure profit. So this is something that we need to make impossible. We need to make it impossible to sell diamond journals to the publisher, not because we don't trust our editors, but just because you never know. And this has recently happened. There was recently a case of somebody who had sold a journal without even talking to their board or team. I don't know, I don't remember the exact title of the journal, but this created a big row, and of course, rightly so. So this is why the statutes need to state that very, very clearly, that the journal cannot be sold. Organization and services. So we have written this constitution. Editorial board signs contract with the publisher. In our case, that's Open Library of Humanities. And the publisher cannot interfere with the scientific responsibilities of the journal, the composition of the editorial board. So basically what we say is the publisher can provide us with services, copy editing, typesetting, the submission system. Open Library of Humanities is a charity and does this for us. We are part of them. They are our publisher. But still, it is a kind of a contract between the Open Library of Humanities and the journal. That is. And in this case, of course, contracts and prices should be transparent, open, and renewable. That is not the case for us because we are supported by the Open Library of Humanities financially. But this is something that you want to be the case if you farm out certain aspects of your operations, like copy editing and typesetting, to an outside party, or if you contract, for instance, with Janeway, the submission system, for supporting for the platform and the submission system of the journal. I have come at the end of my talk. I'm giving you here a number of resources. The OASPA has a very nice toolkit for open access journals. That's open access journals in general, not just diamond journals. There's also a number of articles that I recommend on how to flip a journal, or the things that you have to think about. But this is really what I really wanted to do, is a kind of a quick overview of what is needed for setting up a diamond journal. I hope I have not scared you, because of course I think this is simple, but then again, I mean, I've had to learn this the hard way myself in 2015 when I set up the journal, and I think I was surprised at the amount of things that you need to do, but at the same time, I was also surprised at how easy it was in a way. I mean, none of this is complicated, right? I mean, there are legal aspects, there are technical aspects, but none of this is beyond the remit of somebody who is able to change the clock on their microwave when winter time comes. Okay, I'll stop here.